Obi-Wan Kenobi, the series finale has just launched on Disney+. I can finally give you my thoughts on the entire series. Say hello there to my review. Before I get started with my review of Obi-Wan Kenobi today, as this is not a show that I covered week to week, the first portion of this video will be just my thoughts on the finale itself, and then I'll move on to my review of the show and how it works as a whole in its entirety. This will be a spoiler review. You are warned, and I want to know your thoughts on the show itself, on the finale. How do you rank the episodes? Anything and everything down there. And if you love movies and TV and Star Wars, this is the place to be. So consider clicking that subscribe button so you don't miss any future conversations on your favorite movies and TV. And when it comes to the finale itself, to me, it showcases the best qualities of the show, but also its biggest faults. It's amazing to see the conclusion of the arc of Obi-Wan Kenobi right as the episode starts, and he's on the ship with the rebels. They're escaping from Vader in his Star Destroyer, and Obi-Wan comes to this conclusion where I have to make this sacrifice. I have to separate myself from these people because Vader wants me. The Jedi, myself, we are not the future. Everyone else here is, in particular Leia, Organa, the princess he has been so worried about protecting throughout this entire show. That's awesome. That's the natural conclusion for this compelling arc that he has been in, and even the dialogue itself. I would actually say the finale has the best dialogue of the entire show. It's potent, it's significant, it's meaningful, and it's delivered incredibly well. And so the finale for me starts off at this very high point, very promising, where Obi-Wan makes the right decision, not only because he's a good person, but naturally because it's a natural conclusion for his arc. Everything about his duel with Vader in this episode, fantastic. It's the emotional climax of the show that they have earned throughout these 6 episodes. The setting is spectacular. The dialogue exchange between the two of them is potent, emotionally potent. The choreography is awesome. How Vader overwhelms Obi-Wan, starts dropping all these rocks on top of him, and it's only holding out to that hope of the next generation, of what he has been trying to protect, that carries him over and just lets him tap into the Force once again and become Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi once again and be able to face off with Vader. You have the moment where he cracks open the mask. This is perhaps my favorite scene in the show. This exchange with Anakin, Hayden Christensen, underneath the helmet for the first time that we're seeing. You did not fail me, Obi-Wan. Anakin Skywalker's death is not your failure. You didn't kill him. I did. It's finally Obi-Wan's chance to come to the confrontation of this is not your fault. The guilt that he has been carrying throughout these past 10 years, he can finally let that go. And Ewan McGregor's performance in this moment is brilliant. I had tears in my eyes when he was himself almost sobbing, talking to Anakin, asking for forgiveness for all that guilt, all those demons that he has been carrying. That's compelling, and that represents the best aspect of the show from episode 1 into episode 6 now, and that is Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Whenever the show focuses on him, his inner turmoil, the demons he is constantly facing and running away from in this show, that's when the show taps into the greatness, and it flourishes into great moments. This entire sequence of Obi-Wan facing Vader is great. The show earns it. It works on a narrative level. It works thematically for who these characters are, where they are in their lives, where we know they're going to go, and it works emotionally. It is the natural payoff to everything the show has been doing thus far. where Vader doesn't win, but Obi-Wan doesn't necessarily win either. He wins by letting go of his guilt, by accepting his friend is lost, and it's not his fault. And that's when the show works the best. The other half of this episode, however, represents, again, the biggest faults and drawbacks of this show, where Moses Ingram's Reva just suddenly is on Tatooine. Somehow she got there from last week. She got there real fast before Obi-Wan and the Rebels or even Vader could make it to wherever they were going. And now she's going after baby Luke Skywalker. Well, not baby, he's 10 years old, but she's going after kid Luke Skywalker. After a supposed redemption. It feels like the show wasn't sure what to do with this character, in the sense they weren't sure where they wanted to take this character. As far as the bulk of the show, the setup, the build throughout, that works. What they do with Reva in this final episode reminded me a lot of what they did with John Walker in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where they show this character at their absolute worst, their most ruthless, and then they get defeated, they allude to a sort of redemption, but then they go back again. It happened with John Walker. He killed someone with a Captain America shield. He then helped the Falcon and Winter Soldier in the final battle in New York City, and then he allies himself with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and supposedly he's going to be in the Thunderbolts. That's what Reva's actions, motivations in this final episode felt like, where she's going after Luke Skywalker, confronting Owen Lars about protecting this child as it is his own, and Joel Edgerton does a great job. I like in part that they included Owen and gave him something to pay off that arc that is set up in the beginning. He's a supporting character, he's a side character, and so he doesn't have a lot of time on screen, but when they do, they actually give him something meaningful to do as a character. And so Reva goes after Luke, but again, they try to turn her bad, but she can't do it, and so we're back on the redemption part. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Feels a little bit counterproductive, where there are a lot of parallels between her and Obi-Wan, and if they wanted to do this from the beginning, it just feels like there was a better execution to it, where they're both carrying this guilt, where Obi-Wan is hiding away from his guilt, from his pain, from having lost all his friends, from having lost his brother in Anakin Skywalker, and Reva herself, she's after revenge, because she couldn't protect her fellow younglings during Order 66. And she's used that rage, that fear, those emotions to fuel her power and go after Anakin Skywalker. And now she wants to take revenge on Luke Skywalker. The parallels are there. Reva using that loss, that grief, in a very different way than Obi-Wan. They could have come together thematically in a much more potent way that they do. Where, again, the emotional climax of this show is Obi-Wan versus Vader. And yet, the narrative climax, when you look at the episode structurally, the Reva moment, that is not that well pulled off, comes after that. Feels like we left the main focus of the show midway through, and then we handled all the side plots. Doesn't feel like that natural escalation of things when it comes to this episode. Feels a little bit jumbled. After that, however, we have the goodbyes to Leia. We have the alluding as to what is going to happen. One day I'm going to call on you. Whenever you need, I'll come back to save her, blah, blah, all that. That works. That's satisfying. We need to put these characters in a place where they will go in the direction that we know will find them next. That's nice. The saying goodbye to Luke, coming to an understanding that he needs to be a boy now, as that's the journey he went through with Leia, this young girl that was kidnapped to serve the purposes of the Sith, to draw him out, and he just wants to take her home, because right now all she needs to do, all she has to do, is be a little girl and be happy. And Obi-Wan finally comes to accept that, the same thing about Luke. And we bring Owen to a new understanding of Obi-Wan. Okay, I'm going to respect you. Do you want to meet Luke? We have the hello there and all that before Obi-Wan treads off into the desert, into Tusken territory, and meets Qui-Gon Jinn, which was set up from the very beginning. So I was always just looking at my clock, waiting for when Qui-Gon Jinn is going to show up. That's satisfying. It feels like they set up something bigger than just this. Oh, I was always there. I feel like we could have had Qui-Gon show up to Obi-Wan while he's underneath the rocks as Vader is smashing him. Because that's a great relationship there. Let's not forget that it was Qui-Gon that brought Anakin Skywalker into the Jedi Order. Let's not forget Obi-Wan took on Anakin Skywalker as a mentee, as a brother, because of Qui-Gon. So, satisfying to see Qui-Gon there, Liam Neeson back, talking with Ewan McGregor, both old men, one of them dead and all that. But it just feels like we could have placed that moment to serve a bigger purpose somewhere else in the episode. So, this episode begins and ends really greatly, and ends the show really greatly, in what feels like the natural place for the show to end. But it also has some odd drawbacks that represent some of the odd writing decisions throughout this entire show. And that brings us into the show as a whole. And as Obi-Wan began, I loved the first episode. I'll tell you right now, the first episode is still the best episode of the show for me. We find Obi-Wan in this dark place mentally. He is living with guilt, survivor's remorse, carrying all that depression, all that fear of all that he lost. His entire life, way of living, view of the world was distraught 10 years ago. But he's still carrying on this mission. As depressed as he is, as reluctant as he is to help anyone else besides Luke, he's drawn himself away from the Force and all that. Very promising starting point. The way they introduced the Inquisitors and all that, very promising. When it comes to that first episode, that's all in all 50 minutes of Star Wars greatness. Perhaps my favorite episode of anything Star Wars television. And then there's the rest of the show, where I mentioned before, anything that has to do with Obi-Wan, with handling his emotional distraught at everything that he's lost, at everything that he's going through now that there are Inquisitors, now that Jedi are asking for his help, Bail Organa is asking for his help to take him out of isolation, to become the hero that he does not believe himself to be. That's amazing. That's fantastic. Again, Ewan McGregor, not lost a single step. Everything else feels like a version of the Obi-Wan story between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. But it doesn't feel like the best version of the story. When it comes to Reva, as I mentioned, there are some really nice thematic parallels between the two characters. But it never feels like the show takes advantage of it. Moses Ingram does such a great job. Her performance is naturally intense, but as you go along the episodes, to 3, to 4, to 5, you start to notice the little nuances until the actual reveal in 5. What I feel hurts her is never the performance, however, but rather how the character is written. Because as I said, it feels like they got along pretty well with telling her story, they just didn't know how to end it. And so, when you look at the whole thing, it feels very much like this was an actor that knew exactly what she saw on the page, she knew exactly how to play this character, but because everything else is so undercooked when it comes to the conclusion of this character's journey, her performance comes across as overcooked. Because all the elements were so not well defined on the page, it comes across as if she's doing too much on screen. And I don't think it's her fault at all. I think she clearly understood what the writers wanted from this character, but also the writers did not make that clear on the page, which makes her performance all the more incredible, but they also didn't pull it off in execution on the show itself. Which is a shame because Moses Ingram plays this character so well, with great conviction, with great intensity. Again, such nice parallels between her journey, between her tragedy and Obi-Wan's tragedy. And they're never positioned as mirrors to one another in what happened to them. How does an old man Jedi Master look back on this massive tragedy that took away everything and everyone that he knew? How does a youngling at the time, how does a child get affected by this tragedy after losing all her supposed family, after being taken away from her first family? How does she react to this? How does she take this into stride? How does this, on top of being allured to the dark side by the people who killed her second family, how does that affect her? There's sprinkles of these parallels there. They are clear to anyone who watches the show. But the writing doesn't mind the thematic richness of this. Furthermore, this disconnection between the parallels of Reva and Obi-Wan, the fact that they don't take full advantage of how these two character journeys mirror each other, showcase a bigger issue when it comes to the show's overall narrative, when it comes to the story, and I feel that the show doesn't really know what it wants to say thematically. Obi-Wan is carrying a lot of guilt. He's carrying a lot of survivor's remorse. He's going through this depression. But the way the show showcases this, the way the show illustrates his journey, feels more like PTSD. That's not what Obi-Wan is suffering from. He's not suffering from PTSD from the war. He's suffering from guilt. He's not trying to grow past the tragedy. He is hiding away from his feelings. He's hiding away from what he lost. While Reva, she's using that in all the wrong ways, in all the darkest ways possible. Again, it's not PTSD, it's guilt. And I don't think the show, in the script at least, really understood that. It's trying to play these two very different traumas as if they were one and the same. You can see in Ewan McGregor's performance, hell, you can see in Moses Ingram's performance, they understand what these characters are suffering from. The way that it is written on the page, the way that the show itself seems to illustrate this, it doesn't feel like it understands that this is guilt. This is tragedy. This is survivor's remorse. While one is hiding away, the other one is trying to avenge what they lost. It's not PTSD. A very effective trauma if you want to use that, but write it in a way that Obi-Wan is suffering from PTSD. If you want to rework that, if you want to rewrite history and kind of what is haunting Obi-Wan, what are the ghosts inside him, then yes, use the PTSD. Write him as someone who is suffering from PTSD. That's not what the show does. It's one thing on the page, and then it's one thing on the direction. And the direction clearly shows itself to be much superior than whatever was on the pages. The performances are great, the character moments are great, but it feels inconsistent in what the show is overall trying to say. Again, because it's not using that thematic richness that it has right there in front of it to tell this story. And so the story feels like it has all these character beats that are important, but the journey in between those beats doesn't tell us exactly the same thing that the performances, that the beats themselves do. It's frustrating how the writing translates to the direction in such a different way, and I just couldn't look past it. Where it does mind the thematic richness is in Princess Leia, played by Vivian Lyra Blair. I love her as Princess Leia. She has the necessary spunk and energy of a Carrie Fisher. She's sassy, she's wiser than her age. Everything that we know and love about Princess Leia, she brings to life. I love the inclusion of Leia in this show as the way to draw Obi-Wan out of the shadows. He's so focused on Luke. He's so focused on, I have to remain here in this cave, just looking from a distance to this kid, who is in no danger at all throughout this entire show until the finale. To the point where he even forgets about Leia, who is just as important as Luke. I love that. I don't necessarily love how much Leia was in this show, because it started to feel like they didn't focus enough on Obi-Wan's journey until key moments. And that's the thing that haunts the show, is these brilliant moments, like I talked about, of greatness whenever we're on Obi-Wan's story. But he has this story with Leia that is compelling enough, that is fun enough, and you understand the importance of it, narratively, emotionally, for Obi-Wan finding someone to depend on him as he's trying to find this purpose with Luke. But Owen is there. No one is after Luke. He's okay. And he finds this purpose with Leia. I think that's very compelling. But what works in making this dynamic with Leia so compelling, yet filled with such rich conflict, is that with Luke, Obi-Wan was observing him from a distance. He wanted to get close, but Owen wouldn't let it. With Leia, he gets to know her. He sees how much like her father and her mother she is. And that's exactly what is haunting Obi-Wan. It's the reminder that he lost his two friends with the betrayal of Anakin, with Anakin turning to the dark side. I love this relationship because you can see Obi-Wan like falling in love with this little girl. She's wonderful. She has all the best qualities from his two best friends, Padme and Anakin. But at the same time, she is exactly like Anakin and Padme. The two people that he couldn't save. The two people that he blames himself for having lost. His two biggest failures incorporated into this little girl that he is trying to save. That's what makes this relationship work. The way the story handles it, not so good. Very repetitive. It kind of gets in the way of focusing on Obi-Wan's isolation, on his depression, on his survivor's remorse. But when it's building to all this conflict, when it's generating all this conflict, that's when it's great. It's just too bad that the show never allows them too long on screen together. It's always separating them and bringing them together and bringing them back together with the kidnapping and saving and kidnapping and rescuing again and all that. But in episode 3, when we do get the two of them together in the back of that truck with the stormtroopers, it's beautiful. It's compelling. And it's one of the best qualities of this show. And speaking of Princess Leia, let's talk about her papa, Darth Vader. I have come to peace with the fact that they're breaking canon and all that. I've come past it. I've grown beyond that. Every moment with Vader in this show is so good. I love when Vader first comes in, episode 3, rampaging through this village in search of Obi-Wan when they've located him in Mapuzo, and is just using people to goad Obi-Wan out. He starts to force choke this man, and when his son comes out to merely plead to Vader to not kill his father, Vader just snaps his neck. That's fucking Darth Vader. Such an incredible sequence. Incredible in the sick and twisted kind of sense. That's who Darth Vader is. When he confronts Obi-Wan in that midpoint in episode 3, dragging him through the fire and all that, just playing with him. I'm not going to kill you. I'm just going to make you suffer. That's fantastic. That's Darth Vader. It carries that emotion. It carries all that history between these two. And in episode 5, perhaps my second favorite episode of the series, not only do we get Vader in action, which I'll get to in a bit, we get flashbacks to Attack of the Clones era, Anakin Skywalker, and Obi-Wan. The mullet on Obi-Wan is back, the best hair Obi-Wan's ever sported, by the way. The rat tail on Anakin is back, and we get this sparring session between the two of them that just features all their banter. It carries over a lot of emotion of their relationship when it was at its highest, in its best place. But not only that, is the choreography great? We have a teaching moment between Obi-Wan and Anakin. Obi-Wan inserting some wisdom into Anakin. But then, when Vader is at its most ruthless, he finds the base, he pulls a ship as it is taking off into the ground, but then it's another ship and all that. I don't know how he didn't see the other ship. That's another conversation for an entire day. Just showing Vader at his most powerful, his most ruthless. And when Reva tries to stab him in the back, literally, not only do you get Vader barely breaking a sweat, not even using his lightsaber to fend her off, just using the Force, pulling her, using her own momentum against herself. But you do see in the choreography a lot of callbacks in how Vader fights Reva to the flashbacks that we get in the episode between Anakin and Vader. And that's awesome. That's a great use of Vader as this unstoppable force. Even in the finale, you get Vader schooling Obi-Wan. As Obi-Wan, I'll do what I must and all that. But you do get moments of Vader just absolutely mauling him and owning Obi-Wan in the battlefield. All that rage that we saw in the flashbacks, they're on a whole nother level in this finale fight sequence that, again, fantastic stuff. And it's on these two. The show is fantastic. It's just a shame that the show is not always on these two. It's a shame that the show uses these two as the spice to a fantastic dish, but it doesn't use it as the main meal. This is the main meal. The emotion that comes from this relationship, all that carried history of the two, one carrying the guilt over another one's death, and another one just wanting to kill his former brother, his former master. I love the final moment where Vader is talking with the Emperor. We get Ian McDiarmid back. We get all the setup for A New Hope and all that. It would have been much more potent, particularly with Palpatine questioning Vader's emotions and motives. Would have been much more potent if we had made this confrontation the main focus of the show. The avoidance of Obi-Wan towards Vader. And sadly, the show never does that. Really, it is doing all these other things and having this in the back just ready to launch for the oh my god and all the cool moments. And they're cool and they have the emotion, but the show doesn't mine all the emotion that it could have mined from all these incredible moments. But also, in a 6-episode series, 2 out of these 6 episodes have Leia being kidnapped, and other 2 out of these 6 episodes have Obi-Wan rescuing Leia. Repeating beats in a show like, let's say, Supernatural, that it's 22 episodes per season, 15 seasons long, that's fine. You can get away with that. In a 6-episode show, particularly when it comes to episode 4, where it feels like straight out of A New Hope, not in a homage kind of way, but in a, oh, let's repeat what they did in A New Hope, because then The New Hope will be a repetition of this. It doesn't work. You can see the repetitiveness of the show right in front of your face. And episode 4 is easily the worst episode of the show, where it has some good moments where Obi-Wan finds all the Jedi in prison where it looks like amber as they're kind of these trophies for the Sith from Order 66. We have these intense moments where Reeve is about to torture Leia and all that, but structurally, just the overall thing, it was a really bad episode. And it represented the worst faults of this show. Where again, we have the repetition of the beats. In the Fortress Inquisitorius, that is such tight security, an elite building when it comes to the Empire's infrastructure. And this fake Imperial officer can just walk in, even though it's not her sector, just because she badmouths this one guard. She gets in. The stormtroopers have never been so useless. Their armor serves no purpose, as Tala just takes care of 2 stormtroopers with her bare hands. And the stormtroopers have never had such bad aim. They have bad aim always. They have bad aim in this entire show, but in this episode, Obi-Wan standing in this narrow hallway, surrounded by stormtroopers on both sides, shooting from both sides. They don't hit him once. And then you have the escape sequence that is so lazy. And this show, as a whole, has a ton of lazy moments. Obi-Wan just puts on a trench coat, puts Leia under his arm, and just walks out. Get a droid, one of those trash can droids, put Leia inside that. Get an R2 unit, put Leia inside that. There's so many moments in this show. The chase scene in the second episode where Leia gets kidnapped. Really? The blocking on that is egregiously lazy. And I could look past that if nothing else in the show was like that, but it is. You have all these moments of convenience and of laziness. Things just fall into place or fall out of place as the script demands it. It never feels organic. It never feels natural sometimes. It's always very script mandated. It just takes away from the overall product. It makes the whole thing feel underwhelming because these sparks of greatness on the character moments when it comes to the character writing are then obscured a bit by these moments of storytelling that feel lazy. And when it comes to laziness, I have to talk about the breaking of canon. Coming into this show, it was something that I accepted. As Obi-Wan was about to fight Vader at any point throughout the show. Doesn't happen, for all we always known in canon, doesn't happen between Revenge of the Sith, New Hope. Revenge was the last time they saw each other, and then they reunite in A New Hope. I accepted that we were going to get the confrontation between Vader and Obi-Wan, and it was awesome. Both times that it happened. But then you have things like Reva knowing he is Anakin. You have things like Leia finding out Ben is Obi-Wan. And you have these moments that individually, they wouldn't be so grating, they wouldn't be so annoying. But put them all together, along with all those moments of lazy storytelling in a 6 episodes miniseries, and they start to accumulate. And what was like one grain of sand, no pun intended, now starts to be this small amount of sand. Then you have other moments. Another small amount of sand. It's just grating. Because they're telling a compelling story, they're focusing on a compelling character, but then there are just these moments that feel unearned. Even the moment when Reva kills the Grand Inquisitor in Episode 2 before Obi-Wan escapes with Leia to Mapuzo, and you just know the Grand Inquisitor is going to survive. He's in Rebels. He's not going to die, so you're just waiting for the story to do something with him. And it doesn't. He's just back in Episode 5, as if it is this big reveal, but it's played for nothing. And even if it was played for nothing in that 5th episode, the moment of his return and all that, you could let it slide as long as it paid off something in Episode 6, but it doesn't. He has one scene with Vader where he's trying to advise Vader as to what to do in regards to choosing, going after these rebels, these insurgents, or Obi-Wan. And that's it. So you have all these moments in story where they are cool moments. Maybe they're setting up something. Maybe they're building to something. And they play no role in the story besides shock value and cool moments. Isn't it cool to see Reva betray Grand Inquisitor? Absolutely, it is. Episode 5, When you have the moment between Reva and Obi-Wan, finding out about her true intentions, about her tragedy, it's a cool moment. Doesn't feel earned. Because the writers knew, coming into this finale, they were going to go back on what they did with Reva. Oh, she's good. No, she's bad, but oh, it turns out she's good. She couldn't kill Luke. Oh, okay. It's so frustrating. It's immensely frustrating to have a show that is telling a story that we've always wanted to see, to watch come to life. What happened to Obi-Wan between those 20 years, between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope? And they gave us a version of that story. They brought back Ewan McGregor. They have such strong connective tissue between the prequels and the original trilogy, stronger than it has ever been. Seeing Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan Kenobi on screen with Darth Vader. That's incredible. Seeing Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan Kenobi with little Princess Leia, with little Luke Skywalker. That's fantastic. That sends chills down your spine, that you can see these moments come together. And the prequels and the original trilogy never felt so close, so attached to one another. But then you have moments in the story where it doesn't justify a 6-episode runtime. It feels very underwhelming for what this show is, because this could should very well have been the greatest Star Wars product in television that we've gotten. No character coming into any of the shows that we've gotten this far, and that includes Mando, Boba Fett, the Clone Wars, Rebels. No character is coming off of such a compelling place from the start. And you have the greatest villain of all time, Darth Vader, right there. You understand the relationship between these two. And they're there. When the show focuses on that, what is the natural emotional potency to mine from a story like this, knowing where these characters came from, knowing where they're going to go next, knowing the relationship that they share with one another, that dynamic, all that history. And they don't really focus on that as our main driving force. It's there to be the cherry on top of the cake, but it should have been the cake. And for all the problems I have with the story, and there are so many problems with how the story is told throughout the 6 episodes, where first episode is great, second episode is solid, then you have episode 3 where it has great moments, and then you have episode 4. And then you have episode 5, which is so great. And then you have episode 6, the finale encapsulating all these issues, but also all the qualities of the show. For all the faults, and this story has many, I think Deborah Chow does a fantastic job. I think if you want any of the future shows to carry any sense of emotion, any sense of quality, any sense of pathos for its characters, and if you want to focus on character-driven stories, Deborah Chow is the one to bring in, because I think she does a great job with all these episodes when focusing on Obi-Wan particularly. And even the other stuff. Most of the issues, 99.9% of the issues in this show are because of the writing. The writing just takes so much away from the potential of this show. And I think Deborah Chow, with her cinematic eye, because she has an eye for this, man. The cinematography, the shots in this show are fantastic whenever we're in space. The lightsaber duel sequences between Obi-Wan and Vader, between Reva and anyone else. She clearly has an eye as a storyteller. It's just sad that the script lets her down so much. So I didn't love this finale. I didn't love the show as a whole, but I did love the first episode, and I did love moments of the show. I did love whenever it properly focused on character, when it was a character-centric show that accompanied this fallen hero in his journey back to a place of hope before he actually finds a new hope. It's not as good as it should have been. It's not as good as it could have been. They had a script from the man who wrote Drive, and they chose a script from the man who wrote King Arthur, Legend of the Sword. I say that as someone who likes King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, but just look at the story of Drive. This broken man kind of becoming a superhero, so to speak. There's so many parallels between that and Obi-Wan. It's a real shame that they gave us a version of his story, but it never feels like the best version of his story. In the end, Obi-Wan Kenobi is a show that has misplaced priorities. The story's focus should have been always Kenobi and Vader. They should have been the dish, not the spice. There's so much focus on Leia and on Reva and on the grander galaxy, and while those characters and the scope are interesting, this should have been more intimate, more character focused. There was such potential thematically and emotionally for this show to be great, but ultimately results in something that is just good enough, and the whole thing becomes underwhelming. On a character standpoint, Obi-Wan Kenobi delivers compelling pathos for its title hero, with astonishingly cinematic visuals, lightsaber duels rich with emotion, but sadly, the story itself feels stretched out, repetitive, and unsure of what it wants to say thematically. I'm giving Obi-Wan Kenobi a B. But those are only my thoughts on Obi-Wan Kenobi. Let me know what you thought of the series in the comments below. What was your favorite episode, least favorite episode, anything and everything down there. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my channel members for always supporting the channel. And I'll be back very soon with more videos. So until the next one, love each other and love the movies.